Welcome to Conversations with Big Rich. This is an interview-style podcast. These interviewed are all involved in the off-road industry. Being involved, like all of my guests are, is a lifestyle, not just a job. I talk to past, present, and future legends, as well as business owners, employees, media, and land use warriors. Men and women who have found their way into this exciting and addictive lifestyle we call off-road. We discuss their personal history, struggles, successes, and reboots. We dive into what drives them to stay active in off-road. We all hope to shed some light on how to find a path into this world that we live and love and call off-road. This episode of Conversations with Big Rich is brought to you by the Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame. The mission of the Hall of Fame is to educate and inspire present and future generations of the off-road community by celebrating the achievements of those who came before. We invite you to help fulfill the mission of the Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame. Join, partner, or donate today. Legends live at ormhoff.org. On today's episode of Conversations with Big Rich, my guest is the 1979 Ormhoff inductee, Ray Moon. Ray started his career in off-road while in Vietnam serving his time in the Army. Ray fought for public lands as the conservation chairman and then president of Cal 4-Wheel Drive. Ray, it is so good to have you on this podcast. I'm looking forward to finding out about your history and everything that you've done in the off-road industry. And thank you for being a guest.
Well, Rich, it's an honor to be with you. I thank you. I didn't see this one coming, but glad to be here. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So let's get started at the very beginning. Where were you born and raised?
Well, they told me I was born in New York City, Manhattan. Raised, my dad was in the movie business. He was an executive with Universal Pictures, so we spent some time in Chicago when I was really young, and then came back to New York, and I grew up in Connecticut. Left Connecticut when I was 15, moved down to Kentucky. My dad died. I lost my dad when I was 10, and sadly, and moved down to Kentucky for Mom got remarried, and that didn't work out, so we came out here to California when I was about 16, I guess, about a year later. And I've been out here ever since, moved to Riverside. Ramona High School at Riverside, and kicked around for a year or two and did a little traveling around the country, drove around, and went in the Army, 65.
Oh, it was 65 that you went in. Okay.
Yeah, I went in the Army in 65, and that was in the middle of Vietnam and all that.
Right.
I ended up going to Vietnam. I went to Officer Candidate School. The Army, in their infinite wisdom, decided I should become an officer, so I did. I went to Officer Candidate School 6 months, and in any event, I ended up going to Vietnam in November 67. And it was over there that I actually encountered my first Jeep. That I had a Jeep as a lieutenant. Didn't know how to drive the damn thing. It was all the mud and everything else like that. And I just had never driven one of those. And I was up in a very muddy place called Camp Eagle, and got it stuck because I couldn't find out how to operate the four-wheel drive. So,
I take it you figured it out, though.
Well, so my guess is somebody, I either figured it out or somebody came along and said, "All right, you stupid lieutenant, here." 21 years old, and go borrow my collar, and I look back and laugh now. It wasn't so fun then, but raining and 4 feet of mud seems like. In any event, did better the second and third, fourth day, and so on. It progresses from there. But I came back in November '68 after I was there for a year, and met some folks and got married, and here the brother-in-law and the family were old-time Jeepers, and got me involved in four-wheeling. This would have been about 69-ish or so, 69, 70, somewhere in there, and started doing it then, going out and having a lot of fun, and then.
Let's jump into those early years before you got to California. Let's explore those a little bit. So you were born in Manhattan, and then you moved to Connecticut. But how long were you in Manhattan?
Right. Oh, I just infant time. Okay. I don't remember any time in Manhattan.
Right.
I've been to Manhattan a number of times since then, of course, but. We moved in, my first memory is really Chicago area, outside of the Chicago suburbs. And then about 1950 or so, 49, 50, I was probably, 4 years old or whatever. I kind of remember early Chicago area, and then moving to Connecticut, Westport, Connecticut, where I grew up, and so I was from, say, 4 or 5 years old up until 15 or so. Went to school. I actually went to school with Donald Trump, believe it or not.
Wow, really?
I don't know how many people are going to be happy or sad about that, but it is what it is. I was New York Military Academy up in north of New York, up just a little bit north of West Point in Cornwall on the Hudson is the name of the town.
Okay.
I was 13. He and I are the same age. We're same age. But I had skipped a grade somewhere along the line, so I was a grade ahead of him. I was in the 9th grade, I think. Yeah, I was in 9th grade, and he was in the 8th grade when I first met him. And of course, I was there. I was only there for 2 years. He ended up graduating from New York Military Academy, and at that point, that's about when I moved down to Kentucky. So I left. The family left, and I wasn't able to finish out.
What was it? What was it like going to school in a military school?
Well, I had a little. I had a little trouble after I lost my dad when I was 10 years old. It turned into a small rebel. I was pretty unhappy about all that. So
right.
I probably needed to get straightened out a little bit, and or a lot. And actually, they did. It worked. It worked very well. My second year, I was. It worked. The military.
Structure.
I got it. I grew up. I got it. I said, okay, Ray. Start. You got to start getting real about life. So put it behind you, and so the discipline helped me a lot. And I actually liked the military when I was in the Army. I liked the military. I liked that lifestyle.
That structure and discipline and everything.
Yeah, sure. But it's the military school brought me back into reality, so it was a good thing.
Right. Okay.
But the military, it was a lot of drill and a regimented situation.
Sports,
as you might imagine. Sports, football and swimming. Football and swimming primarily.
Okay.
That kind of thing. But yeah, I didn't know. I knew Trump, and of course everybody. It was a fairly small school. I don't remember exactly how many people were there, kids were there, but everybody kind of knew everybody. Depending on whatever grade you were in, it doesn't matter. Everybody kind of knew one another. We didn't always hang out together, but I knew him. And people asked me what he was like, and I say, well, he was like a 13-year-old kid. What were you like when you were 13? So,
I probably needed military school.
Well, yeah, precisely, and maybe he did too. So we, so that's the reality of it. He probably needed a little bringing up as well. So,
right.
So, but yeah, that's that, and then coming out here in high school and whatnot. Bowling Green, Kentucky was interesting, but
Why? What
well,
was what was interesting about Bowling Green?
well, a different. Growing up in Connecticut, I knew nothing, or knew very little about the South. So that's a whole different culture.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so there was. How do I say this in today's world? When I got there, there were still white and Negro, quote unquote, restrooms.
Very segregated still. Yes.
Yeah, yep, yep, and so on. Those kinds of things, and we're talking 60, 62, I guess, 61, 62, somewhere in there.
And you weren't being in Connecticut. You weren't used to that at all.
Oh my God, no. We had no, not not at all. Just the opposite. We had uh, friends who were of all colors.
Right.
And it didn't matter to us. People are people, and it's always been like that. I've never lost that early upbringing.
Good.
People are people.
Yep.
Yep.
It's not what's on the outside; it's what's on the inside.
Absolutely. Treat me nice and I'll treat you nice, and so on and so forth. It's just the same kind of thing. And I've never lost that. It's your early upbringing, and maybe one of the most chilling things I've ever seen in my life. When I was in Virginia going in the Army, I was up in Richmond, Virginia one time. It was evening, during the summertime, maybe 6, 7 o'clock at night, probably 7. And I actually saw a pickup truck with about 4 KKK members with their white robes flowing in the breeze.
Wow.
And yeah, and that would have been 60, probably 66. Yeah, in Richmond. Yeah, that would have been 67. Excuse me, probably 60. Yeah, 67. And that has stayed with me, and it's a very chilling sight, and it's pretty. Anyway,
Right.
you can only imagine, but it's as late as 67, and I don't know what's going on down there today. I haven't, I've been through the South, of course, recently, 2 years ago, or yeah, but anyway, pretty chilling.
Right. So then you go from Bowling Green, Kentucky. You move to Riverside, California.
Yeah, Riverside High School, and finished up high school, and then kicked around and went in the Army in '65, November '65, and basic training, AIT. I was infantry, but ultimately, when they sent me to Officer Candidate School, I ended up in the logistics world. They felt that I would be better there. They were probably right. I was in Vietnam from November '67, November '68. I went through the Tet Offensive. I actually, I don't know. You just get through the year,
Right.
and I guess the worst part about it was coming home, and the changing culture and the attitude of the people that you loved. Some of the people that I loved, I lost a girlfriend because of that. A 6-year girlfriend. We were going to get married, and she had been watching the newsreels during the time that I was over there, and wondered whether I was killing any babies, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And the answer to that, of course, is no. But that's what they were indoctrinating everybody with. So it was tragic.
So what kind of student were you in school? Say in those once you got to California, were you a good student, or were you looking for to get out?
I was always pretty bored with school, to be honest with you. I mean, most of my senior year was spent on the golf course. I decided I did play golf by then, took it up, and but I was always a pretty good student, so I could get by pretty well.
Okay.
And
And
anyway, when I came back, I wanted to obviously go to work. I got a job because my dad had been an executive with Universal. I was able to have an in with Universal. They got me a job at the theater out in Riverside, and I worked there for about 6-7 months, and then they brought me into Los Angeles to work in the Universal distribution center in film distribution in Los Angeles, and I did that, and that started my career in theaters, film distribution, and working with theaters. So I was not in production at all.
okay.
Primarily distributing film from Universal, and then after a while, maybe 10, 11 years or so, 12 years, I got into exhibition when I represented theaters buying film for a certain number of movie theaters down in the Oceanside. I got a job offer down to Oceanside, and I moved down there in '76, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I did that. So about 23 years in the movie business. Got and then that went south in the early '90s, and found myself without a job for about a year and a half, and ended up going to work for Camp Pendleton. I was also a sailor. I'd learned quite a bit about sailing. I'd sailed when I was a kid, and became a charter captain, a Coast Guard charter captain.
Okay.
And I became the harbor master there at Camp Pendleton for 11 years, and then they moved me up to the beach up at San Onofre, and became the general manager up there, and I retired in 2010.
Okay.
Yeah, and since then I played a little golf and worked with veterans. I was with an organization called Run for the Wall. It's about 1,800 guys, motorcycles that travel from Ontario, California to the Vietnam Wall in Washington, excuse me,
Right.
on a Memorial Day weekend, and I was a support vehicle for about 400 of those guys.
Wow.
And I did that for about 7 years. And up until about 2 years ago, I think it was the last run I did. And then I live here in Simi Valley now, and I'm a volunteer at the Reagan Library, the presidential library here in Simi Valley. I'm a docent. I give tours and help people. So I'm a volunteer at the library here in Simi with Ronald Reagan, and I enjoy it very much. It's strictly a volunteer situation. I've been doing it for about a year and a half now.
What?
Yeah, but
when you guys moved out to California, I read that your mom invested or became partners in a motorcycle business.
Prado Sports Cycle in Corona, Norco, I guess technically, in the Corona area.
Okay. How did that all come
yeah.
about?
Don't know. She met this guy named George Harding. He was probably looking for an investor. Mom had a little money, and he. In any event, she probably made the deal. Well, I'll invest if you hire my kid. So I learned a little bit more about motorcycles and rode some and worked on them, and there was a guy named Homer Stapps. I don't know if some of your folks might know that name, Homer Stapps. He was an old flat tracker. He raced it in Ascot years ago, back probably in the 50s, 40s and 50s.
Okay.
Interesting guy. But anyway, but yeah, that was some of my early motorcycle stuff. So
that was your first foray into. That was easy for me to say. Into off-road. Then was that early motorcycle?
Yeah, I suppose that's fair to say. I guess took some of the smaller bikes, the 80 and 110 and 120 horsepower Yamahas and Voltacos and stuff like that. Not so much the street. The biggest bike I ever rode was a Norton 750 back then.
Right. Those are good sized bike back then.
But I would take the smaller bikes off road and go anywhere on the Riverside, Corona area. A lot of open fields back there, trails and whatnot, hill climbing, and what have you. Sure.
Okay. Are you moving around a lot? Are you walking or something?
You mean right now?
Yeah, right now.
No, I'm stationary.
Okay. It just sounded like there was a lot of movement. Okay.
Nope, sorry.
No worries. Okay, then the motorcycles, you were working there at the motorcycle shop, and then was that your only employment in the morning?
At that time, yeah, I was probably 18, 19 years old at that point.
And then from there you got into the military.
Yeah, pretty much. I think I had another job in there off and on. Worked at a factory, Hunter Engineering.
Okay.
But yeah, but I always, November '65 I went in. It was during the draft. I went ahead and joined. I was RA. I was joined in November '65 and 3-year commitment, but ended up as I joined the infantry. I was 11 Bravo, the MOS, but ended up, like I said, as a logistics officer. Commissioned in February of '67, I think. Yeah, sounds right.
Okay. And was that I had some relatives, cousins that were stationed in Vietnam, and to them they told me it was a heck of a culture shock going in country like that. And did you feel that way too?
Are you kidding me? It's like it's like going from Southern California to the moon. It's different. It's a total culture shock. It's I tell you, you get off of there, we pulled into Saigon, Tonsanut Air Base or Benoit or wherever, and we get it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and they open the door to the plane, and everybody's a little apprehensive, shall we say. And I remember I was about a third of the way back on the plane on the ports on the left-hand side, and the heat comes back to plane. It's like the temperature came back from a comfortable, I don't know, 68 degrees or 70 degrees, whatever they keep the plane at, down to 85, back up to 85 in about 4 seconds.
And the humidity.
And then it got warm. Yeah, then it got warmer from there. And then it's 6 o'clock in the morning. And then you kind of step forward and whatever, you finally get to the door, and then you take a whiff, a smell. You smell the country, and you go, I think I've really made a mistake here, because I actually volunteered to go to Vietnam. It was, so that's what my thought is. I may have screwed up here. I may have, if this is what it's going to smell like, and it did the whole year, then it's a pretty foul smelling place at least it was back then.
Right.
I've seen pictures now. It's totally changed, but back then it was very, oh golly, it was just a mess. It was like a third world country. It was
absolutely.
A third world country.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the Jeep, the first time you got in the Jeep and you said you couldn't shift it and you were in the mud and all that. So you were a fresh lieutenant at that point, and they just handed you the keys to the Jeep and said, "Here you go."
Pretty much. I mean, I had been a lieutenant. I went through I stayed in Virginia after I became an officer in February '67. I stayed in Virginia for 6 months, putting another class of officers through. So a drill sergeant, if you will, or drill lieutenant, I guess you might say. They called us TAC officers. So 6 months I stayed in training, continued training, and the only way to get out of that cycle back then was to volunteer to go to Vietnam, and so that's what I did, because I just couldn't see myself spending another year and something in the military, running around the hills of Virginia training officers. So I wanted to do something different, and so I did have a little time as a lieutenant. But anyway, when I got over there, then I went to a place called Da Nang, which is up in the northern portion of South Vietnam. It's called I Corps. And I worked for a lieutenant colonel, and he sent me on up to north of that, up toward the DMZ. So I was in a place called Phu Bai and Dong Ha. Your listeners that are familiar with that know that you can see North Vietnam from Dong Ha. So it's, you're right there on the northern border, in the middle of the war. I mean, because the Tet Offensive was February of 1968, and I had been there about 3 months by then, two or 3 months. So, but yeah, so I was in the middle. There was a Battle of Hue, Hue, which was the largest battle of the entire war, I believe. It's kind of involved with that. So. But yeah, and that's all in that same area where the Jeep was and everything. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you come back to the States, and you pushed a lot of information into a short period there. Got married, got into 4-wheel drive. It sounded like it was a 4-wheel drive family that you married into, and then right. Working at Universal. Let's stretch that out a little bit. You came back to the States, came back to Riverside, and
mm-hmm.
What was it like stepping off that plane back on good old USA soil?
Another major adjustment. A little. I remember looking at the news, and there was a I guess, I don't know if it was a teacher or a student. I think maybe a teacher, a professor, supposedly, at UCLA. I think her name was Angela Davis.
Oh, yes.
And she stood on the steps of UCLA and yelled out in front of the TV cameras, "I am a communist." And we had just been fighting the communists for a whole year. And I made the offhand remark. I said, well, if you take her 10,000 miles away, we just shoot her in the head and not even think about it. And that's true.
Right.
Well, people probably today will go, oh my God, that's all true. And naturally the family, the girlfriend and everything thought I was a monster. But I didn't say anything that was untrue. And so it's a whole different, I had to readjust back to the real world, this world, from a world that was totally different from the one I had left a year ago.
Yeah, especially since back then everybody coming back was looked at as, like you said, did you kill babies?
I did get, nobody ever spit at me. They've asked me about that. Understand that, well, nobody ever spit at me. Nobody ever threw anything at me. They did ask me, I've been asked if I killed any babies. And of course, that's absolutely true, not true. But so that takes a while. And then after, it only takes 1 or 2 or 3 times to figure out that maybe you shouldn't tell anybody where you were.
Right.
And so then you shut down and you say, well, where have you been? I said, well, I've been traveling or whatever, kind of thing. You just don't tell anybody where you were. Well, that doesn't work very well. And so for 25, 30 years, that's what you do, which then leads to what? PTSD is what they call it today, right? And we all have problems with that. And so I was no different. And 20 years ago now or something like that, after being coerced into going to the Veterans Administration, which I'm happy to have done, they decided that I had a little touch of that, more than a little touch of that. And so I can talk about that today, but I couldn't talk about that 25 years ago, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Because you just shut up and you shut down, and that's not the right thing to do. So those kids that are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan and so on and so forth today are being counseled properly, but we were not counseled at all 50 years ago. So we live and learn.
Right. And there's still a big issue with those kids coming back nowadays.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. It's not an easy transition.
No, it's not.
And the difference is I was there for a year. Now, some of the guys in Vietnam would extend or go and spend 2 or 3 or 4 tours over there. And they could extend for 6 months or they could extend for a year. So some guys spent like 3 or 4 years over there. Can you imagine what their little brain was like?
Right.
But the kids today, they're doing, I understand that because I work on Camp Pendleton, they were doing, I think it was 7 or 8 month tours, but they were doing it, they do 8 months and then come back here for 4 months and go back for an eight months. So they were doing repeat tours all the time. So some of those kids were over there 5, 6 times over a period of years. And that's a huge impact on somebody.
Right. Especially when over there, most of those places, everybody's trying to kill you.
Oh, absolutely. And it's, well, war isn't a lot of fun.
Right.
That's what you're doing. If you jump into a snake pit, guess what? They're all trying to bite you. So it's the same thing,
Right. So then your 6-year relationship with the girlfriend ended, and you, I take it you met your current wife after that?
Well, no, that would be not wife number 1.
Okay. Then you met wife number one. All right.
Yeah.
And
that lasted about 10 years.
Okay. Any children from that?
No.
Okay.
No.
And you were working for Universal Studios, but you were in distribution.
Yeah. Yeah. And I worked there at Universal, I don't know, like 4 years, 5 years, 4 years, something like that. And then got into independent distribution, which I liked a little bit more because it was less structured, and I learned a lot. And just overall, it was a great business to be in. I liked it a lot, but there was a lot of in the early. In the late 80s, I guess, there was, I took a job back up into, I'd gone down Oceanside to book those theaters. So we had a bunch of theaters that I was buying film for down in the primarily San Diego area, Riverside and so on. And then got a job offer to go back to Hollywood, back to Century City at the time, and worked there, became a sales manager for the country for an independent company about 4 or 5 years. And in 91 or 2, that went south and became unemployed. And then went to, got a job at Camp Pendleton as working at their boat marina. They still have a boat marina there on Camp Pendleton, sailboats and powerboats and that kind of thing. And I'd gone to school and gotten a master's license from the Coast Guard. So I had a 100-ton master's license both power and sail from the Coast Guard in 84, I think it was, 84, 85. So I spent a lot of time on the water at that point. Gave up four-wheel drive stuff in the early 80s. So I had done the four-wheel drive stuff for about 10, 12 years. And then the divorce in 80, 81 kind of led me down another path, and that's how I jumped onto boats.
So interesting. So kind of, you got out of got out of off-road in the 80s. Okay. But you were you were in the 80s. I mean, once you got home in the 70s, you were jeeping, I take it, or off-roading. I won't say Jeep because who knows, you might have been in a Toyota.
No. I was Jeep. I was Jeep.
Jeep. Okay. Jeep. Okay. And you became the conservation chairman for Cal 4-Wheel Drive?
Yeah, I sure did. Yeah, a guy named Harry Buschert, who was also in the Off-Road Hall of Fame. He was president. I've forgotten what year. He was president, and we were at a meeting, and he said something or other, and I got pissed off at him, and he got a hold of me after the meeting, and he said, you got a little spunk. He said, why don't you become if you got something to say, maybe you can change the system. So why don't you become my conservation chairman, which essentially back then it was the land use guy. I became the land use guy, and that was part and parcel of that. So I said, okay, I will. And so that's what led me down the land use advocate kind of thing. And it dovetailed with the timing. There was a fellow, J. Russell Penny, was the state director of California BLM, and they had come out with this program, the Interim Critical Management Program for the California Desert. And this would have been about 1971-ish or so. Could have been 72. But anyway, so they were going to designate 72 areas within the California desert, and they were going to have it either open, closed, or restricted. And so they were going to tell us where to go, what we could do, and so on. And of course, keep in mind, I'm still fresh coming back from Vietnam, fighting for freedom. And here they're telling me what I can do. And
more so what you can't do.
More so, I was just going to say, and more so what I can't do, exactly. The closed and restricted and so on and so forth. So it just kind of all hit me the wrong way. And I went to work and I learned a lot about, I dove into it. And that's kind of my nature. So I dove into it and made myself pretty smart on it and picked up, learned about the Code of Federal Regulations and the Wilderness Act and the Wild Horse and Burro Act and Multiple Use and Sustained Yield Act and all this other stuff that one has to know about that National Environmental Policy Act and all that stuff that I used to deal with. I was able to quote quite a bit of that stuff back then. And so I got upset with the BLM and the Forest Service and took them to task.
Well,
and
thank
they
you.
didn't like me for it. Well, it was the only, nobody was calling them out on it. Nobody was saying, no, you can't do that.
Right.
Nobody was doing that. And so guys like Bob Ham, I'd say nobody, but very few of us were doing that. Bob Ham was one of the guys that was in there in the early days. He fought mostly on the state level, and I was more on the federal level. Now, there was some crossover for both of us, but most of his work was state level, and most of my work was federal.
Okay.
Yep. So.
And who else? And you said Harry. And who else were some of the guys that you went to war with to keep our public lands public?
Well, Harry was had been president of Cal 4-Wheel at the time. He even just said something, Harry and I became very, very good friends, and Harry is also a member of Off-Road Hall of Fame. He was inducted in '78 with myself, '79, excuse me, with myself.
Okay.
But no, you could. Russ Penny was the state director of BLL. Delmar Vale was the Riverside director of BLL. Lou Bull was Bakersfield director of BLL chapters. Doug Lease was a Forest Service for California federal.
So nowadays, when we deal with BLM
Yeah.
and Forest Service, typically the people we are dealing with have come out of college and have degrees in land management, conservation, archaeology, all those kind of things that and they're pretty much indoctrined into a very liberal view of how the land should be managed. And by that I mean, it's easier to close things down than to leave them open. What was the attitude of BLM back then in the '70s? Was it they were just following directives, or were they more environmentalists, conservationists, exclusionists? I should say, not conservationists. We're all conservationists, but
That's true. That's true. What you just said. They were bringing on more and more eco freaks, we used to call them, and people that, just like you said, it was easier to lock it up and throw away the key than to allow off-roading to take place. It's interesting. We went there. There was a woman named Beulah Edmonston. She was elderly, and she we also called them posy pickers and a lot of other things. I remember she was in something wrong with posies, but you know what I mean.
right.
And she was happy that we had closed down, or that there was some restrictions. It might have been Death Valley or areas around Death Valley. It's up around that area, something or other. I don't remember exactly the area. And she said she used to call us ORVs, ORVs, but she called us ORVs. She turned this into a word. And so that then she could take her Buick out and enjoy the posies. And the BLM guy, I think it was Delmar Vale, who was a great guy. He came back and he said, "Listen, Beulah, listen, if we restrict them, we're going to have to restrict your Buick." And she said, "No, you don't understand. I get to go out there and pick up posies." And he said, "Well, no, you don't." And there's this realization finally that hit those people saying, "Oh, well, you mean if we restrict them, we restricted ourselves?" Yeah, pretty much.
Right.
Oh, oops. Oops.
Yeah, that's one of the things that the equestrians and the mountain bikers and even the hikers, and backpackers and rock climbers, the guys with ropes and stuff, not with rubber tires.
Right.
They don't seem to understand is that, the trail that they use or road that they use to get to where they want to go becomes closed. So now they have to venture farther away from their vehicle than they would have done to begin with, meaning that some of those areas are even out of reach for them, unless they're super young and energetic and have the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, if they live, let's just use Riverside as an example. If they want to go out to the desert, they can start hiking from UCR, University Avenue there, and it's a long walk out to Barstow,
right.
That kind of thing, and so on. So yeah, that's what was going on. It was the fight early on with the BLM was actually there was another fellow, Ron Crandall, who was he had a master's degree in biology and ecology, and he was a biology teacher at North High School, and he was my environmental advisor, if you will, and good friend. He passed away some years ago, but he knew. He knew the names of all the beagle weeds and the pucker bushes. He educated me as to, what was really going on out there from an ecological standpoint. And so that brought me up to even be able to talk on their level. And so he and I and my brother-in-law at the time, Dick McPherson, the three of us, we went out and charted, and we went to all of those 72 areas that Russ Penny had wanted to restrict, close, or open. We went to each and every one of those. We documented them, and they were all wrong. The BLM with their narrative did not fit what was going on picture-wise, and we had pictures. So we still have the pictures somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where all those are right now. I think the McPherson has them. But so they were embarrassed up one side and down the other, and we were able to affect some change with that by doing those things. We called them out on it, and we had photographic evidence that they were out in left field. But concurrent with that, there were places like Darwin Falls, up not necessarily too far from Simi Valley in that area. Where we felt that they were right, that we should not go to places like Darwin Falls with our vehicles, so that we could take our vehicle, say within a half a mile or so to Darwin Falls, and then walk the last half a mile. And we thought that was reasonable. So we tried to take a reasonable stand in dealing with the land, where ultimately, and it took me a while to figure this out, the way the environmentalists were going is they felt that if they went so far one way, that the BLM would have to go more toward their way than our way. And so we then that forced us to go, if they wanted to go far left, then we had to go far right, when we didn't really want to, because we wanted to take kind of a reasonable attitude toward all that. But we had to go so far right that the BLM somehow or another had to try to find some middle ground. Well, the problem with that theory was this was during a time where they were hiring more and more environmentally friendly, if you will, people. And so there was more closures that they would advocate, and that's how it turned out.
Right.
There was and the reasonableness. Bill Mayhew, Dr. Mayhew, was a recognized expert, especially in the sand dunes, down to the Algodones sand dunes down by Brawley, what they call Glamis sand dunes. The real name, of course, was the Algodones. But he and I sat down and we one day, and we worked out a reasonable plan. And I found out that they did not want anything to do with the high sand dunes that were down there. And we didn't want anything to do with the low scrub flatland on the base of the sand dunes. So we worked out an arrangement, he and I, to provide access for us, small trails, and there was only like 4 of them here and a few of them there, into the high dunes, and then we would leave the scrub alone. And we went to the BLM with that, and they went, "Wow, we had no idea." And I'm thinking to myself, all these years you had no idea? But anyway, yeah, Bill and I, Dr. Mayhew, signed off on that. And the BLM, for a while, frankly, Delmar Vale agreed to it. And then 2 years later, they said, well, we're going to change that, and we're going to close down everything north of Highway 78. for no particular reason.
Right.
And so they once again they showed their unreasonableness toward all that. Well, I mean, there is some. If you take the government out of it, you can find some common ground, but you can't take the darn government out of it, apparently. So there's no common ground to be found most of the time.
Right. And now the environmental groups are all run by lawyers, and
of course.
so it's a way for them to generate income.
Well, and then they pass their own laws. So they pass the laws, and then they get to enforce them. Sure.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly. But those are the early. I'm just giving you some of the instances and names of some of the early fights that we had.
Right.
That and the way that it was approached, both on our point and theirs. It was an interesting time. It was an interesting time.
Yeah. Were the off-road businesses? I know there weren't, back in that 70s, early, that late 70s or mid to late 70s, there wasn't a whole lot of four-wheel drive businesses. I mean, it wasn't like it is now. But were those businesses open to helping?
Like you said, very and thank you. You had Dick Peck. You had a few of the others. You had some of the tire manufacturers. You had Firestall. Back then, you had very few names, however, that would get behind that. Parnelli Jones was always very supportive of us. He helped me out on a number of occasions, dealing with some of this stuff. Jeep Corporation. I wrote a land use handbook myself, and I guess I kind of took the lead on it, but I had Ron Crandall and a number of other people add to it. I sold one copy of that to Jeep Corporation for $500. Because I needed some sponsorship, and Jeep Corporation back then was pretty friendly toward us. Today, of course, it's all different. We needed some sponsorship and some help. So there wasn't a lot of corporate stuff that was coming in. No, Subaru would help now and again, believe it or not.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, not a lot from Toyota, not a lot from
the big three.
Yeah, the big three. Now AMA, District 37, District 38, down in San Diego, and so on and so forth. They had their own things going, and we worked very well with the motorcycle guys, the AMA. We worked very well with Corva, California Off-Road Vehicle Association, Dave Swoger, Bob Ham, which hooked up with Corva. I was a member of Corva. So we banded together. We had in unity there's strength, and we had to come together.
Right.
We had the Rock Hounds with us. We had a multitude of. There is, if you go out into history, you look at the Multiple Use and Sustained Yield Act. There is such an act out there, by the way, and so we were multiple use, and that's what we tried to present.
And you end up becoming president of Cal 4-Wheel in 1980.
Yeah, it's actually 78 and 79. I was president. 78, 79. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. And then 79. Yeah, I was president for 2 years, and then that's when, sometime during that period of time, I guess it would be the fall, August, something like that, is when Dick Peck got a hold of me on a Saturday morning and asked me if I'd ever heard of the Off-Road Hall of Fame. And I said, no, not really, Dick. And he said, well, you will, because you're in it. And I went, wow, okay. So that was it was very flattering and not expected. You don't do any of this kind of stuff uh, for the glory, that's for sure.
Right.
A lot of hours, a lot of travel, a lot of a lot of volunteering, if you will.
And back then, there wasn't a big ceremony. It was just or did they have any kind of a ceremony?
Well, back then it was founded by SEMA, the Specialty Equipment. I think back then it was called Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Association. I think it's Marketing Association now. Um, and no, they Dick told me I was going to do that, and there was some other guys, Harry Bushert, like I said. There's Mark Smith. You said you'd been on the Rubicon. And
right. I knew Mark.
Of course, was Mark, of course, was the premier guy there, along with some others, Brian Chichua and a few others. There was five. John Lawler. I didn't know John Lawler. But there was some other guys there were five of us total. But anyway, long story short, they flew Harry Bushert and myself. We went back to New York, and there was a SEMA show in Long Island someplace, maybe Huntington, but anyway, Long Island someplace. And we spent 2 or 3 days back there doing this with SEMA, and we were going to various meetings and dinners and doing this Off-Road Hall of Fame because it was fairly new at the time. Well, it was new.
Right.
Just been a one year old. And then I think Harry flew back and I went down. We were hooked up with their counsel back then, Russ Dean, John Russell Dean, and who I saw 2 years ago. Back in Annapolis, I was there, and my friend Ted Garish. And we went down to Washington. We did some lobbying down there to try to help out the cause while I was on the East Coast. But yeah, it was so a ceremony. Yes, it wasn't what it is anywhere close to today. It was during the SEMA show. It was a small dinner, as I remember. There was people there for sure. But today it's a huge deal, and rightfully so. I think it's great.
Have you been back to an induction ceremony now, the gala, lately?
I went a couple of years ago. Okay. I've been to two of them. I don't get a lot of time to do things like that, but I look forward to try to doing that. My life is different today. Of course, I've got grandkids, and I'm certainly able to go from time to time. It's just a function of time.
Right.
Physically, I'm able to go. I'm still in. I have a saying: you keep on moving, so you can keep on moving. I box 3 times a week, and I go swimming. And
wow, very good.
And I do tours at the Reagan Library and tell people about President Reagan and his. I was just up at his ranch yesterday. He had a 688 acre ranch up above Santa Barbara.
Yes.
I was there yesterday, and I saw his Jeeps, and I have pictures of 2 of them. Both of them were CJ6s. One was a 64, 62 or something like that, early one. And the other one looked pretty much custom made. It was a Jeep for sure, a little newer than that, but it had been severely customized for him. But yeah, I've got some pictures of the 2 Jeeps he had. Like I said, I was just there yesterday. What beautiful place, gorgeous.
Yes, up there in the mountains, but gorgeous.
But rustic, yeah. I mean, it was 1,600 square foot house, but it was not what you would think. It was anything. It was not even close to palatial. It was your standard bunkhouse, if you will. Have you been there? Do you know about it?
I've been up to the ranch. We were not we were not able to go in. I went to college at Brooks Institute of Photography in Santa Barbara, and so we did a lot of exploring while I was there.
Yeah. Well, we had a tour because being a docent there at the library here in Simi, we were afforded the opportunity to go through the house,
Wow.
through the Secret Service quarters, through the garage and the barns and everywhere. We couldn't take pictures in the house, but we were allowed to take pictures elsewhere, and I have some.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, we were able, no limitations. We could go wherever we wanted, but no pictures again in the house. But everywhere else, we were allowed uh, to go. It's very, very interesting and a wonderful man. The more you learn about him, it's amazing. But anyway, that's another topic. But he was very much a four-wheel drive guy. He was in his Jeep. When he wasn't on a horse, he was in his Jeep. So
Right.
vice versa.
That's what I understand.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
So you box and you swim. You stay very
Yeah.
active. Then that's great.
Well, I'm trying. Like I say, you keep on moving, so you can keep on moving.
Right.
It's I see a lot of people I see a lot of veterans, sadly, that well, they just don't have that motivation or what have you, and they're not doing it, and frankly, sadly, they're not doing well physically. We're losing a lot of them. I lost my brother 2 years ago. He was a vet. He succumbed to Agent Orange, and he was a Vietnam. But anyway, he succumbed to stuff from Agent Orange.
Yeah, because you were one of three boys.
Yeah. So I'm the oldest, and my two brothers, they were twins, 14 months behind me. Dave is still with us, and he's always been in excellent health. He's still wearing the same size jeans he did in high school.
Wow.
Yeah, I know it. And he tried to take care of himself, healthy food and all that stuff, but he's got his problems too. They were going to send him to Vietnam, but I was already there. So they sent him to Korea and put him on the DMZ. Well, while he was on the DMZ, they sprayed Agent Orange on the DMZ in Korea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that, but it's true. And it's out there. You can find that information.
Right.
So he's alive and well, reasonably well in Denver at this point. But yeah.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for discussing your life with me and sharing it with our listeners. And I hope to get to meet you someday. If you come out to the gala, I've been at all the galas since 2011, I think it is 2010, and now that I'm on the board, I'm definitely going to be at all the gala. But if you get out to one, we'll have to make sure we say hello to each other. And if I would love to get down to the library, the Reagan Library, and I think my wife would enjoy that as well. So maybe we'll meet up there.
Well, you got my contact information. If you do get anywhere near there, I'd be happy to take you through there and give you a tour of the place. It's a phenomenal place, and he was a phenomenal man. And many people think one of our very finest presidents. So
I agree.
And certainly he's one of the very finest in the last number of generations. So
yes.
Anyway, but it's a serious invitation, and be happy to do that. And I will try to make at least one or two more galas up there in Las Vegas. I don't know. When is it this year? Is it coming
back?
up?
It's going to be back at SEMA on the Saturday before, or the Sunday night before SEMA. So it'll be that the October.
Oh, October.
Halloween. Yeah, the end of October, beginning of November.
October, yeah. That's what I thought. I couldn't remember whether it was Halloween. Well, hopefully you'll let me know or somebody, and I'll try to work those things out.
If I don't, I'll make sure Bob does.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rich.
I appreciate it, Ray, and
God bless.
have a wonderful day. And like I said, I hope to get to meet you soon.
You as well. Take care. God bless.
All right. God bless.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, that's another episode of Conversations with Big Rich. I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you could do us a favor and leave us a review on any podcast service that you happen to be listening on, or send us an email or a text message or a Facebook message, and let me know any ideas that you have, or if there's anybody that you have that you think would be a great guest, please forward the contact information to me so that we can try to get them on. And always remember, live life to the fullest. Enjoying life is a must. Follow your dreams and live life with all the gusto you can. Thank you.